what I particularly love about this type of practicing tantric sex is that there's a deepening of my love for my husband. There's a deepening of our commitment to one another. It is truly replenishing to our marriage when we take time to do that.
You're listening to Get Your Marriage On, the fun and spicy podcast bringing you new tools and fresh ideas so that you can be the sexiest couple you know.
There's no doubt in my mind that there's a deeply spiritual and emotional aspect to really good sex. When two lovers come together as really good friends that want to give and receive pleasure and connect to know each other at a very deep and intimate level, sex takes on very deep meaning and is almost electrical. Many in American or Western culture put a big focus on orgasm and finishing during sex, and probably for good reason. I have no data on this, but I would say the typical sexual encounter between most married couples in middle age, probably 20 to 30 minutes long, and that's it. Sometimes shorter. And it's okay to focus on orgasm and finishing for a really good reason. Orgasm feels really good. I mean, really, really good. However, once in a while, we're too busy driving to our destination that we fail to see the beauty along the way. Slowing things down, way down on purpose, can bring you a new view of sex and a deep, intimate connection you may have not noticed before. Today's guest is Tammy Hill. She's a licensed family marriage therapist as well as a professor at Brigham Young University in the Family Sciences Department. She and her husband Jeff have 12 children, and I lost count of how many grandchildren. She's studied and taught a slower, more thoughtful approach to sex, which is full of awareness and soulful connection, called Tantric sex or slow sex, for more than a decade. And I am so pleased that you get to hear from her today. Before we jump into today's episode, I have two announcements. First is that we opened registration for our next couples retreat. The couples retreat is March 23 through 26 in warm and sunny St. George, Utah. These retreats are a powerful way for you and your spouse to replenish your relationship. As of this recording, we only have 8 spots left. You can reserve your spot by going to getyourmarriageon.com and click on Couples Retreat in the menu. Secondly, I'm really excited to tell you that we recently published a new guide called From Awkward to Arousing, a guide to dirty talking for Christian couples. It's a tasteful, comprehensive, step-by-step guide to increase connection with your spouse through erotic conversation or quote-unquote dirty talk. This guide has something for both brand new, hesitant sexy talkers and those who may be a little more experienced. Use the included worksheets in the guide and game suggestions to explore new vocabulary and increase the connection, passion, and fun in your marriage. And here's what Rebecca said about it. She's gone through the guide and this was her review. She said, "From Awkward to Arousing is packed with ways to enhance your dirty talk game, even if you're a newbie. I love having worksheets for my husband and I to fill out to get us going in the right direction. If you're looking for a way to see dirty talking in a new light, then this is the book for you. It's filled with tons of sexy game ideas and scenarios ranging in different levels of spiciness." Thank you, Rebecca, for writing that. Just for the record, dirty talk doesn't have to be dirty, and this guide is for anyone that wants to use more language to add more arousal and excitement in their relationship. You can get this guide from our website at getyourmarriageon.com, click on Resources, and then Guides to Better Sex. Tammy Hill, I am so honored to have you as a guest on the Get Your Marriage On podcast today. How are you?
I'm so good, Dan. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. You do such great work.
Thank you. You do too. In fact, you have a new book coming out with a really interesting title called Replenish.
Yes.
Can you tell me the inspiration behind how you came up with that title?
You bet. So I love studying about the creation. I've spent a lot of time, years. I'm old, so I'm talking like decades,
Uh-huh.
studying about the creation and wanting to understand men and women and how women fit into the whole plan. And
By
those
creation,
are-
you mean like Genesis, like
yes,
God's creation of the world. Okay, yes.
yes,
Uh-huh.
the creation of the world and the creation of Adam and Eve and how man and woman come together and create the world and repopulate the world. And I was studying probably about close to 10 years ago, one day I was studying this, my favorite thing to study. And it caught my eye on the scriptures that when the animals in the creation were commanded to multiply, that Adam and Eve, as man and woman, were commanded to multiply and replenish. And
Mm.
I felt like I had such revelation in that moment that we're talking about the sexual powers of multiplying, right? And tied right there next to it was replenish. And I thought, what a beautiful way to think of sexual energy and the time you can take together sexually as husband and wife to really make this part of a replenishing, fulfilling aspect of life. And so my husband, Jeff, and I are both of our first spouses passed away, and we've been married now for 16 years. And between the two of us, we have 12 children. And when we were married 16 years ago, we had 9 children living at home. And I can honestly tell you, we had no time.
No, plus they're trying to blend families. It's
Yes,
added stress,
oh,
and
so much stress.
it's like
Um,
overnight, your family size doubles and your responsibilities triple.
right. And during that time, I chose to stay home. So
Mhm.
I wasn't working because there was so much change happening within all the children's lives. I felt like I needed to be more of a stable force here at home. And, we really didn't have replenishing sex because we didn't have time to have replenishing sex, and we never had space to have replenishing sex. And I, as a child, I can remember my mother saying, when she was teaching me about reproduction, I asked, "How long does this take?" And she said, "Oh, about 5 to 7 minutes." And that's the kind of sex that Jeff and I were having in this first part of our marriage, and it's like, there's more
Uh-huh.
than this, there has to be more than this, and so, when Replenish jumped out at me when I was studying in Genesis, I felt my heart pounding, and there was so much more for me to learn and understand about this aspect of our sexuality, so that's where it came from. That's a long answer.
Oh, that is so beautiful, and that's probably the springboard to some of your other things that you've researched and learned more about, which is what
Mhm.
brings us to what we wanna talk about today, which is about tantric sex. And I guess my question is, what is tantric sex, or what makes tantric sex, quote, unquote,
Oh.
"tantric"? And in other words, I think when I first heard it, I thought of it as like it's another religion
Mhm.
of like a sex worship instead of worshiping God. Is that is that what it is? Or
Well, there is a group, neo-tantric sexuality, that is a lot like that. It's a lot of group orgies and not it's all about personal satisfaction and hedonism, really. And then tantric sex is more of a Hindu and Buddhist practice that began anciently. They have Sanskrit where they have recorded all of the positions and philosophies around this type of making love and tantric sex. Now, the kind that I practice and the kind that I teach is based more on wholehearted connection with your spouse.
Mhm.
um, I had chronic pain, for several years with back problems and having regular Western style sex was really uncomfortable for me, and that's when I started researching to learn more about tantric lovemaking and what kind of lovemaking, might feel better to the back, and that's when I started doing the researching and learning so much and loving this aspect of sex. To me, it was honestly like, I've described it this way. Maybe I've described it this way even to you before, but like you're in your house that you've lived in this house for 20 years and you know every nook and cranny, you've cleaned every part of it. And then, one day you're cleaning and you recognize there's this door that you never noticed before, and you open the door and there's a whole 'nother house that is on the other side, a whole wing that you've never known was even there.
Mhm.
And for me, this is what tantric sex has been like, is like opening the door to a whole new world of sexual expression that is beautiful. Western sex is beautiful, but I think pressing them. There's two sides to every hole, and I think it's a more holistic approach to making love.
Great. So let's define what Western sex is, just so everyone
Okay.
understands what we're talking about.
I'm talking about the sex that we, basically in the United States, have grown up understanding what sex is. It's very male centric, that sex is about orgasm, it's about ejaculation for men, and that men are um, the ones that thrust in and out of the vagina while the woman receives that. And it's very goal oriented and typically not really focused on women's pleasure because it's fast.
Speaking of fast, what's the average American copulation time? I guess.
No,
How much time?
I haven't read that most recently, but what comes to mind is 7 minutes. Do
Mm-hmm.
you know? Have you read that?
I don't. I've read lots of figures, and it's all self-reported, right? So who
Right.
knows? But like, I guess when a couple has sex, usually 20, 30 minutes is about the amount of time they give themselves, perhaps,
Oh, 7 minutes is the average for a man to
to ejaculate.
ejaculate and be done.
Uh-huh.
That's what I meant. But yeah, and
Uh-huh.
for women, they can take up to 10 times longer to actually orgasm. But yeah, I would say roughly for a couple, if they're both going to orgasm, generally less than 30 minutes.
Mhm. Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. So now we shift from the more Western view of how we do sex to a more Eastern view. What's that Eastern view or philosophy about sex? How is it different?
It's it's more about not doing sex, it's more about being sex or being love and
Mm.
creating love and retaining, not focusing on orgasm, but retaining that erotic energy, um, and metabolizing it for other things that in your life. It's a lot about connection. It's a lot about going slow. Penetration happens, and then as you continue to practice tantric sex, your body shift around the penetration. You try to stay connected genitally, and then shift your bodies around that connection rather than thrusting in and out and working against each other. A lot of pull, like women's breasts are their positive pull center for sexual energy, erotic energy, and a man's penis is his positive pull. And so the idea of bringing those energies together cyclically and making that energy kind of hum between the two of you
Mhm.
is a lot about what practicing tantric sex feels like.
Is this a good metaphor where Western sex could be more like a firecracker, fireworks, whereas the more Eastern style is like a log on the fire?
Hmm.
It's it doesn't burn as fast, not as hot, but it's a slower burn and it kind of stays for a while.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's a
I
metaphor.
think
Does that?
that's a really good metaphor, and there's room for both. A lot of times when I'm teaching or doing workshops around tantric sex, people think I'm really against orgasm, and I'm not. I think there's always room and place for all of it. I think what I particularly love about this type of practicing tantric sex is that when you are really coming together as husband and wife and you're working to make this a slow experience and you're having that real intense eye gazing and you're learning about all of the different erogenous places on the body, not just the genitals, right? And nipples and breasts. Um, and taking time to really explore and understand each other. And it, there is a love that I don't know how to say. I don't feel it in any other way. There's a deepening of my love for my husband. There's a deepening of our commitment to one another. It is truly replenishing to our marriage when we take time to do that.
Gotcha. So it's like you're not as distracted by the sensation of orgasm to really slow down and really enjoy each other, I
Right.
think.
There are sensations. I mean, as you continue, not at first, most of the time, most people say as they first start practicing tantric sex that they like it. It's kind of boring. They're not sure if they're doing it right. And they always ask, are we doing it right? And
Uh-huh.
that's kind of funny to me.
Uh-huh.
But I think the more that you practice and make this a part of your sexual story together, you'll start feeling sensations that you don't feel in orgasm focused sex that are equally as pleasurable. Not over the top climax, but more like was the hike around, instead of hiking the mountain top, this was a hike around the lake today.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So you put on a workshop a few times a year where you teach couples this kind of an approach to sex. And my wife and I took it. It was fantastic. I highly recommend for everyone to do it too.
Thank you.
Um, and what you told this story about, so you're at this really busy time with, do you say 7 or 9 kids? You're trying to blend these two families
Uh-huh.
and you're just not having a lot of time for each other. You have back pain. And then you discover this. How much time did you carve out of your week after that point to have this kind of sex with your husband?
That is such a good question. And we immediately started getting on our calendar. We've got soccer, lacrosse, piano, drums, all of the lessons, all the school, all the work. And then we would look at the calendar and try to find 2 hours minimum that we might be home alone during the week. And we would definitely carve out a little spot for that. And we knew that that was our time
Mm.
to go slow and to replenish sexually. And we planned around it. And sometimes people will think that's not really spontaneous and fun. But when you really have a big family and lots of going on, you have to create time for it. It's not going to be spontaneous. And so for us, that worked. We also committed at that time that once a month, we were newly married people and in love, all those feelings of newlyweds, and weren't having any space to really love each other the way we both wanted to and had longed to do. And so we committed at that point that we would once a month go away for 2 nights, um, and just have those 48 hours alone. And that once a year we would go on a trip that was at least 2 weeks long.
Wow, that's so good. That's so good.
So we kept that.
That's great. Some people hearing that might go, 2 hours a week just for sex? Like, that's too much time, or that's not enough time, depending on who you are.
Yeah. Well, we are in a fast-paced society.
Yes.
It's all about being productive. And if you're not doing something, you're wasting your time, or we're so do instead of just be.
Yes. All right. So I want to talk more about being. For those like that are brand new to this, what are some tantric sex practices? Let's say they're like, okay, I want to try this. I want to set aside 2 hours for each other. Where do you recommend they begin?
Oh,
Where's a good start for a beginner?
such a good question. Okay. I would totally start by having showers, get all clean. When you're clean, you come to bed with confidence. And I think that's important. So come to bed clean. And before you even look at each other or touch each other, I want you to spend about 7 to 10 minutes just deeply breathing, eyes closed, kind of just centering yourself and paying attention to what your body is feeling. What are your senses tuning into? And really ground yourself. And then about 10 minutes, roll on your sides and face each other. And at this point, I would just maybe kiss, hello, I love you. I'm so glad we're here. Take a few minutes to kiss warmly. And then I would encourage people to gaze. And that's where you kind of back up a little and you can look in each other's eyes. You can only look in one eye at a time because that's just how it works. And so you look in one eye of your spouse, and then you look in the other eye, and you kinda go back and forth, and, at first, it feels kind of weird, and a lot of people giggle, and it feels really uncomfortable for some people to do this, but I believe the eyes are the windows to the soul, and that as you learn to really gaze into one another's eyes and take time breathing and gazing, there will be a deep connection, and like a knowing of each other that you don't typically take time to do. And so I think spending time gazing, a good 20 minutes gazing
Mm-hmm.
and just breathing. I love one of the tantric practices is that the woman sucks on the top lip of the man while the man sucks on the bottom lip of the woman while they're kissing. And it sounds kind of weird, but it's really fun. And then to take time really kissing, deep throat kissing, exploring, all of your mouths, underneath your tongues, all around your gums, like explore that and take time to have some really passionate kissing. And then probably from there, I would say shift from kissing to sucking on each other's earlobes, blowing lightly in the ears, going. One of the really highly sensitive areas on both men and women is the nape of the neck where the hairline um, ends.
Mhm.
And so, blowing or licking along that line and then just giving little tugs on the hair along that line, it enlivens your whole brain and it's really stimulating. And then work on down to, rub your hands together. Wrists here are highly sensitive, the inner wrist, that's such thin skin and it's got your perspiration and pulse points right there that are powerful. And, there can be a lot going on right there if you take time, even just I do it while I'm talking to you.
I'm doing it too. It's okay.
Rubbing your wrist.
This is a show and tell. If you're listening, don't worry. We're fully clothed.
Absolutely. Or running your fingers lightly up and down the inner wrist. That's very, very sensitive.
Mhm.
Anyway, just kind of exploring all of these little parts. And then with penetration, there's 2 ways to
Wait, before we
penetrate.
get to penetration,
Okay,
I want to
okay,
talk more about erogenous zones. Is that all right?
okay. Well, yeah.
So there's this comic or meme that circulates the internet. It's really funny. It has a picture of a woman and a man side by side, and it says women's erogenous zones, and there's arrows pointing to like all parts of her body, like head, shoulders, knees, toes, everything. And for a man, it says erogenous zones of man, and all there's like 10 arrows, but they're all pointing just to his penis. Like, and I thought that was funny, but
It
it's not true at all. Like
isn't.
we it had and one thing I learned from you is like we have primary, secondary, and even tertiary erogenous zones. Can you explain that?
Hmm. Well, the primary erogenous zones are going to be your mouth, your tongue,
Mm-hmm.
lips, your breasts and nipples, and your genitals. Those are the hot spots. There's a lot of nerve endings happening in those areas. Anytime you have an opening where there's air that can come into your body, there's a lot of nerve endings and there's a lot of pleasure points there. Your secondary erogenous zones often correlate with your pulse points.
Mm-hmm.
So if you, wherever you feel a pulse, is a good place to kind of slow down and practice different types of touch, like maybe a little feathery touch or a kneading touch or a wet touch or a cold ice cube touch or a blowing touch. Experiment with the types of touch because you'll find out that, like for me, the inner wrist, Jeff can grab my inner wrist like this and it doesn't do a darn thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if he goes really slow or blows on it,
Uh-huh.
I go out of my mind.
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, take time to do that. And find those on the pulse points. Tertiary are the least sensitive. And so a lot of times with the tertiary, you need to get warmed up, kind
Mm-hmm.
of be warmed up a little bit. And then as you start incorporating those into your lovemaking, you can get a lot of pleasure from those. One that I really like is my finger, that outside of your pinky finger. If you brush up from where the wrist is out, kind of the meaty side of your pinky finger right there, that can be really, really sensitive. Also, your little finger in and of itself, like often I will lick my, it can be too personal,
No,
maybe.
that's fine.
I'll lick my little fingers, and while my husband is kissing me or whatever, I will kind of put those in his inner ears, which the inner ears are obviously going to be a secondary erogenous zone.
Mm-hmm.
There's a tertiary erogenous zone, different types of touch with wet. So he's getting aroused with my touch, and I'm getting aroused with my touch. And so
Mm-hmm.
it was fun to just mess around and put all these different kind of parts together with different kind of touch, and that takes time.
One thing I loved about your teaching around this is I think at least I might just be speaking for myself, but I go straight for the primary erogenous zones. That's because I think that's how sex should be.
Well, that you grew up in the Western world.
Yes, it's a very Western
Yeah.
approach. But when we actually stop and go, no, 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 we're not doing any primary. We're going to start with secondary and then sprinkle some tertiary.
Mhm.
Because once you kind of awaken and get aroused, like your whole body becomes a giant erogenous
It
zone.
really does.
There's parts of my body that I usually don't like getting touched, but when I'm aroused, they like turn me on like
Mhm.
crazy. And it's not my
Absolutely.
genitals. And that's really fun. Like all of a sudden it made lovemaking from like a very systematic, very linear experience to like,
Mhm.
you know, like stopping and enjoying the journey.
Yes,
The journey.
that's well said.
Mm.
It is about the journey, and there's so much you can it's just playful. There's no rules. You don't have a checklist of things that you need to do. Now I've done this, and my next thing is this, and this, and this.
Mhm.
And so there's just more experimenting and learning together um what works, what
Mhm.
feels good. And to me, it's been really, really a fun part of marriage. This has been replenishing for
Mhm.
us.
Yeah. All right. So, uh, and there are some things that you probably don't think of usually that can add more variety, like back of the knees,
Hmm.
even sucking on toes. And I've read that in a book before, and so I said to Emily, "Let's do this." She's like, "Really?" "Yes, I want to suck your toe." Anyway, she's like, "Yeah, I don't think we'll do that again." But hey, at least
Yeah, but you tried and you
it's
learned.
playful, it's fun, and that's the
Mhm.
whole point. We make sex so serious sometimes, like, gotta get to orgasm
Yes.
or whatever, and we're just stopping to really enjoy.
Mhm.
It just adds so much more variety to the whole experience, especially
It
because 'cause
does.
you're not in a rush.
Yes, it slows everything down. And you know, Dan, as well, I'm sure your listeners know that, especially for women, slowing the whole lovemaking process down is going to really help her have the arousal and desire she needs to keep going. It feels for women when a man is taking time to really get to know her body, her erogenous zones in different ways, that he's really invested in her
Mhm,
rather than in having sex and having this experience. He's invested in her pleasure, in the goodness of her. And to me, it can just be such a real fulfilling way to communicate your love for your wife.
mhm. Before we talk about penetration, which is where we wanna go next, there's one more zone that was a surprise to us, and it's on your lower back. Can you talk
Mhm.
about that one?
Yes. The sacral lumbar junction is if you look down your spouse's back, just above the buttocks, you're going to see two dimples on either side of the spine. And that's your sacral lumbar junction. It's a series of there's bone and nerve centers that are all coming front and center right there through your pelvic floor, groin, as well as down from your brain and your spinal column. And so it can be a big pleasure center, and massaging that area. It's like a little triangle, an upside down triangle where you've got the two dimples, and then it comes down on either side to the butt crack, the beginning of the butt
Mhm,
crack, and just that little area there. There's so much that you can, massaging it, then putting an ice cube on there and letting it kind of melt. It feels uncomfortable at first, but then as it melts and you blow a little bit, you can feel these nerve endings becoming alive. And the retreat you came to, I'm sure I told you the new research that they're doing for anorgasmic women, which is so cool. These are women who have not been able to orgasm despite medical care. And they found that by putting electrodes on this area, the sacral lumbar junction, more than half of the women who haven't been able to orgasm are orgasming now.
that is
With
fantastic.
it is so
Mhm,
exciting for them.
mhm. That's good, and, like, when giving a massage, if your spouse lays on the bed and you're giving like shoulder massage, you can position yourself and sit on that spot and shift your
Mhm.
weight around on that part of the body too. And it's more,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Even taking a vibrator and
Hmm.
using a vibrator there can really help with some of that.
It's fantastic. All right. Then what's next?
Okay. So according to Tantric sex, there's two approaches to penetration. I'll tell you the one that's going to be easier first.
All right.
That is to have the man come all the way in to the vagina, his penis all the way into the vagina. And then once he reaches in as far as he can, to kind of pull back roughly a half of an inch and then just stay there. No thrusting. Again, you're doing a lot of breathing, gazing, kissing, really connecting in other ways, but you're just leaving the penis there without thrusting. The other approach is, and this is what I always teach in the beginning classes because people don't have any idea that you can do this, but to have the penis enter in like a millimeter at a time.
Mm.
And it can take, if you really go slow, a millimeter, you go a millimeter, both of you breathe. The whole time you're practicing tantric sex, there's a breathing and an opening of your pelvic floor to loosening all of the muscles in the pelvic floor, especially for men, the anus. Men often hold a lot of tension in the anus so that they can maintain their erection. And if they were to loosen all of that and women to open up and loosen her pelvic floor, you're going to have more space created that you don't typically feel in Western sex. And so as the penis goes in millimeter by millimeter, and each millimeter you're taking time to breathe and you can talk, laugh a little, breathe, kiss, touch lightly. And then finally the man will come in. So after 20 minutes or so, the husband's all the way in at that point, and then to come back just about a half of an inch. And the reason that, I understand, and this is from Diana Richardson's work, who I love her work and I admire her work so much. But she says if you come back, once you're all the way in, penetrated, and so a lot of times men will be real close to the cervix. If you come back about a half of an inch, you can start feeling, as you wait patiently, you can start feeling energy, the energy pulls of the feminine and masculine working with each other without any thrusting motion at all. And there's this, in time, the cervix actually kind of reaches down and will pull, like it pulls the penis up inside. And so the penis can snake up farther into the body, the woman's body, than ever thought possible. And along with that, there's this energizing, um, just like it's kind of a buzzing, is an energy that takes place that is really, really pleasurable. And it's also, there's something more to it. It's like, we did this, our bodies did this naturally together. We didn't have to make this happen. They just naturally will do this if we take time to let them, kind of feeling,
Hmm.
And,
Hmm.
that's very, very bonding. Also during this time, you are, like I mentioned earlier, you're trying to keep connected with your genitals as much as possible, and you're shifting your body around that connection, and then breathing into it, opening, loosening the pelvic floor all along as you go.
Hmm. That's great. Is there room for silliness and play in
Oh,
all
for
of
sure.
this?
This is,
It's not
yeah.
supposed to be quiet like a library, right?
No, no. Well, I think the thing that's so cool about this way of making love is that there's time, enough time as you practice this that you are going through a series of emotions. There'll
Hmm.
be times when you're getting started and gazing that it's kind of silly and giggly, and then there'll be times that are deeply spiritual as you feel like there's more than just us. There's more.
Hmm.
And then there's times that feel so connecting emotionally, and then times that you feel such joy. There's just such a series of emotions that can happen as you practice and slow down.
So, you've come together, he's penetrated, but there's no thrusting. Kinda hold it.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, I'm sure there's a lot of kissing, eye gazing. You can still touch each other, and then you're going to shift positions.
Mhm.
And part of the fun is, can you slowly shift positions with a lot of awareness,
Yes.
right? A lot of
Mhm.
awareness, keeping the eye gaze like to a sitting up position or from man behind position or whatever you want to do, or move to a chair without him pulling all the way out.
Right.
That's part of
And
the
it's tricky.
uh-huh.
It's, and you kinda get into your as you're learning, it's like, "How do people do this? This is impossible."
Hmm.
But keep practicing, and you'll come to your positions that you naturally start flowing into, and staying connected, and I think the idea behind the connection is that you're working your genitals are I don't like to use the word working. Your
Hmm.
genitals are, um I don't know, congregating or something. They're coming together in
Hmm.
this way where they're not being worked against and they're not being disconnected and then reconnected. It's more just staying in that connection and feeling that energetic pull between
Hmm.
the two masculine and feminine genitals.
It might sound really woo woo to say this, but there really is a sexual energy and it circulates like a circuit, like, and
Mhm.
you feed off of
Absolutely.
each other. But you don't find that if you're really interested in like a quick Western style, bam bam, like type of a sexual encounter. It really comes from this really deep, profound togetherness.
Mhm.
It's like a celebration of
I
being
love
one.
that word. Yes. It's a
Celebrating each other.
celebration.
What's the recommended practice then for continuing this? Because remember, the goal isn't orgasm or ejaculation per se, although that may happen, and that's fine if it does.
Right, right.
I kind of view it as you have a 2 hour, 3 hour type session for something like this. In my mind, that's how I picture. You can
Yeah,
use it
yeah.
before, but there's also another way to experience this too, but split up over days. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I call this ultimate massage, and that's where, you're actually not penetrating during this time, but you are alternating each day, and the goal is not to have sex, and it's to retain that erotic energy, and it works really well if you don't have a 2 to 3 hour window that week
Mhm.
to make love, and I think every couple will be unique. Sometimes after practicing a few hours, maybe you want to go ahead and have an orgasm together, and that's totally fine if that's what you guys decide. Whatever you do is fine for you. Then other times you don't need to orgasm as much. But the idea is more to retain the energy in your bodies that there is energy. It's like almost like batteries pulling together
Mhm. Or
sometimes.
magnets.
Yeah,
Yes. Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah. Pulling together, sometimes it feels like that. So, ultimate massage is alternating days for 6 to 8 days, where one day the wife will give the husband pleasure and it's tactile. I like to encourage couples not to practice oral sex um,
Ultimate
during
massage.
ultimate massage because it goes too fast. It will go too fast. You start orgasming too quickly. And so taking time to really look at and see and tactically come to know one another's genitals is really important. I think as you come to really know one another, you help bring your spouse to feel good, and when they feel like they might orgasm, they are responsible. I call it tapping out. You can tap their head, tap their arm, whatever, but tap out, and that's a signal that they're getting too aroused and they need to, back off on the touch for a minute. And then for 8 minutes, you give this pleasure tactically, and then give a 2-minute warning to 2 more minutes you touch, and then you kind of put your hand up snug against the all the holes and against the penis. Women typically need to use both hands, with an erect penis and cutting here from the anus with both hands, and you're just snugging that energy in close
Mhm.
to the pubic bone and, grounding that energy, pushing it back into the body proper.
Mhm.
And I usually recommend holding it just snug like that for a minute or 2,
Mhm.
and then kissing each other and getting up and going about your day. It brings a vitality back into your relationship that is really fun and playful.
Mhm. It's like there's a buzz. I don't know how Not like in your head, but it's like this vibration that we experience, I guess.
Yeah, well,
It's hard to describe in words, but yeah.
it's so hard to describe in words. I
Mhm.
agree. It to me is like you're going back in time when you're falling in love and
Yes.
anticipating being together.
Uh-huh.
We didn't have sex until we were married. That was what we planned to do. And so that whole build up, anticipating till you're married and you're going to be able to make love,
Mhm.
and but you're not. You're just kind of retaining all that energy, and it feels magical, kind of.
So when a man ejaculates, I kinda imagine that's when his sexual energy dissipates from the body.
Hmm.
I'm
It's expended through the semen.
it's expended, yes. It's a resolution, it's a finishing. It's like a big giant thunderstorm here in Utah, like we experience in other parts too. You see this cloud in the afternoon grow bigger, 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 bigger. The clouds get dark, 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 and then thunder, right? And then
Yeah.
rain. And then 5 minutes later, it's gone and the clouds are all gone. It's like
Right.
it does that to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this other practice, you still have that build up, but there's no thunderstorm per se.
Mhm.
So it
Mhm.
kinda carries over and
Yeah,
kinda
yeah, yeah.
stays in you.
Mhm. Totally. It stays, and I really encourage couples to practice this for about a week, before they let each other have an orgasm, and that doing that for one, there's just something that has to be said for a lover that can control themselves and not to have that immediate gratification.
Mhm.
When you are with someone that can control that and choose to postpone the in the moment pleasure, that just really does build up the energy. And then when you actually do have an orgasm, it's just so much more profound and is that big thunder and, you know,
Yes.
the
Uh-huh.
lightning in the sky.
So for a man ejaculating and the sexual energy, leaving his body, that makes sense. Is it the same for a woman who has an orgasm too?
Mhm.
Does that sexual energy dissipate?
The sexual energy it does it with the contractions of the uterus and the cervix and all the vaginal wall. I mean, those contractions are you're building up the tension, and then there's this release and through the orgasm, and it is an expenditure of that erotic energy.
Gotcha. So let's not release. Let's keep build, build, build without the release and see how much we can tell. Like, can we increase our capacity here? It's like,
Yes.
can we, if we were a reservoir of sexual energy, can we grow our sexual reservoir to contain more sexual energy without releasing? That's kind of
I
the
like the way you said that. I think that that's a real conscious way of making love, and it just makes it all so fun.
That's good. This is definitely so fun. All right.
I agree.
Can you talk about more of the, I guess you could say spiritual? Like, if I define spirituality as connecting to a higher source or connecting to something bigger than me, this is definitely what we can experience sexually. Can you talk about why or how this kind of an approach to sex some people would describe as a much more spiritual experience?
I believe it's because you're seeing each other, especially with all the gazing that you're doing. You're really seeing into each other's souls. You're taking time for each other, which is definitely a symbol of you matter.
Mm.
You're important. And anytime someone feels like they're chosen and someone's looking into them, I believe they feel aligned with some of the divinity that's within them. I I can't put my words all around spiritual experiences very well, Dan. I wish I could, but I can honestly tell you that some of the more relevant, revelatory experiences I've had regarding sexuality have come in the practice of tantric sex, where it's like this is really knowing someone. Um, this this is what it means to cleave. So many of the words that I understand and relate to marriage and to
And
scripture.
to know,
Yeah,
this
to
deep
know, right.
knowing. Uh huh.
This is
Yes.
knowing, this is a cleaving, this is divine. There's such goodness in it, and it taps into that part of who we are and aligns us with our God or greater power. I think that there's also the awareness that you're putting on how you're feeling, the slowing down to feel things within your body. Um, to me, our souls are made of a body and a spirit. And when we tune into what's going on in the inside, a lot of times it brings this life to the outside. And so I think there's something there with it, kind of paying attention to what's really happening inside of you when you're practicing this way.
Hmm. Tammy, this has been a fabulous and very fascinating discussion.
Thank you.
As we conclude, is there anything else you wanted to say?
I think one thing is that a lot of times in Western sex, our minds are full, but when we are practicing tantric sex, or slow sex, we're mindful.
Mm-hmm.
We're present. We're present with each other. We're not up here in our heads. And
Yeah, because a lot of people complain, and stereotypically, they say women's minds are like the World Wide Web, right?
right.
So there's things buzzing all the time, and during sex, they can't really relax. And it's not just women; men are that way too
Right.
sometimes.
Well, the brain's the biggest sex organ. And so if you can bring your brain to bed and be mindful and breathing and present, like I said, to ground yourself first, that's just to get into your own skin. But also, not only is the brain the largest organ or the largest sex organ, but our skin is our largest organ overall. And I just have such what you call a sex testimony
Yes.
of skin to skin touching and sleeping naked on occasion, and to spend time with as much skin touching each other as possible. There's so much good brain science going on with that connection of skin to skin contact that I think we need to practice a lot more of that.
Mhm. That reminds me of another. I guess I guess you could consider it like a tantric practice. During Sextember, when my wife and I were planning our challenges for the month, we had a very busy month. And what we decided to do on most days was just hug. We're just going to stand and hug, and hug for 10 minutes was kind of our goal. And just that body to body contact, my face in her hair, and just breathing together, just really settling ourselves down and present with each other, just did wonders for our relationship, because it's that body to body contact, it's that learning. Our brains love body learning, I think.
Right. That I don't remember what science I was reading, but it's like 20 seconds. In 20 seconds of hugging someone, your endorphins are being released within your brain, and that's our bonding. A lot of our bonding and
Yes,
pleasure.
oxytocin or something,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah. So there's a lot to be said for just simple touch like that.
mhm. Yeah, I love your work because this just expands the idea of quote unquote doing sex, or it's more about, like you said, being sexual, being together. That's what
hmm
it is.
Yeah, being love,
Mhm.
creating love and being loved together.
Being loved, yeah. Where can people go to find out more about you, your workshops, and your book and
Um,
things like that?
so I am my website is tammyhill.com. I host the Live Your Why podcast, and you are a guest on that. I'm excited for that episode. I teach at BYU, but my husband and I are retiring at the end of next semester from teaching at BYU. Um, I have a book coming out in January 2023 called Replenish, a guide for creating sexual fulfillment in marriage. It's a guide for LDS couples. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, but that I'm just around.
Very good. Thank you.
You bet.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Get Your Marriage On. And if you did, we would love it if you would take a few seconds to give us a rating on iTunes and to share the show with your friends. They'll thank you for life. Once you've done that, you can head over to getyourmarriageon.com for more resources about today's topic and to download our amazing marriage apps. Now go get your marriage on.